We have a very exciting program for you. I'm very excited to announce that our today's keynote speaker will be James Mickens from MSR. And James is the biggest name in potentially computer science research. And it's also a very big name in real computer science research. And so without further ado, I will hand over to James.
All right, thank you for that amazing introduction. My name is James Mickens, as was just mentioned. I'm a researcher over at MSR, right across the bridge. And today I will be delivering the keynote that you deserve for the Potential Computer Science Conference. As many of you know, I am very busy, very important. I'm actually shocked you could get me here today. So I probably won't be putting this on my resume, and I'll probably have a very serious conversation with my booking agent, but obviously I digress. I'm glad to see that there are a lot of grad students out there in the audience. I know that it can be difficult for you because you are poor and you have nothing. And it's also very tough to have your papers constantly be rejected, and yet somehow your advisor is on those papers, but he or she is doing fine, even though the papers are still getting rejected. It can be very, very tense. I know you have that fear of being homeless at any moment because your advisor cuts off your funding. You're basically in an abusive relationship, so I feel your pain. But let me just tell you, though, that, I understand what it's like to go up to the vending machine and get excited because 2 bags of potato chips came out. You only put in money for 1. Okay, so don't be too proud to accept comfort in the small things. But I will say, though, that things do actually get better when you go out there and you graduate and you get a real job. Unless actually you go to the Bay Area, in which case your life will actually get much, much worse. So you're going to get paid a ton of money, but essentially you're going to spend it all on housing. There's a housing shortage out there, and they haven't built a house since 1836. And you're going to know that when you move into your first house in the Bay Area, and it's going to look like someone has just died of tuberculosis in there. And in fact, there may actually be a dead person who has tuberculosis in there. And so you're going to go there, you're going to look at this place, and you're like, oh man, this is a shame, it's going to cost you $900,000. And that's like on the low end. So let me tell you a true story. So I actually just got back from the Bay Area, so I was at Oakland Security presenting a conference there, and so presenting a paper there. And so I had a friend who works in Facebook, and she said, well, James, I'm pretty excited, I just moved into a new apartment. So I said, okay, well, if you don't mind me asking, how much does it cost per month in rent? She says, $4,000 a month. So I said, so you have a butler. Right? So you have a butler, you have petting zoos, you have all these kinds of things. And she says, no, I don't have any of that. She says, you must have one of those pools where you can swim, but it makes like an infinite wave, you don't have to move anywhere. She said, no. And so I said, so how many square feet do you have out there? She said, about 650. I said, what? And then it continued, right? And then she said, yeah, I have 2 roommates, and then one of those roommates is actually a couple. It's we're actually sharing it together. I have a futon that we sort of rotate on. It's pretty rough. And at this point, I literally said, you're not being wealthy in the appropriate way, right? So the advantage of being in the top 5% of income is that you get to own hovercrafts and eat caviar, and then you commit crimes, but you don't go to jail because you're rich. So the whole point of being rich is not that you're actually living in some type of dystopian, against a refugee movie. So I guess the moral of the story is that if you get an advanced computer science degree, you can either feel poor in San Francisco, or you can feel rich in Gary, Indiana. Right? So there's not a whole lot of computer companies out there. Maybe one of you enterprising young students can start one of those companies, and then it'll get big, and you'll get rich, and then you can use that money to, maybe buy all of Gary, Indiana. It's actually probably not that expensive because it sucks out there. So anyways, I guess what I'm saying is that life is all about choices. So I got invited to give this keynote at the conference of Possible Computer Science. So maybe an interesting thing for us all to think about is, what is computer science? So I think that one way to define it is, it's the process of asking the right questions about computers, and then trying to find some good answers to those questions. Now, I'm sure that there are some optimists in the crowd because you're young and therefore naive. And so you're probably thinking, well, how could there possibly be a bad question about computers? Well, I would say, well, I found one. That, in fact, is actually a bad question. So one thing I'm not sure that they're teaching you here, but most questions about anything are bad, because at this point in human evolution, we know almost everything. Most answers should be obvious to things. So for example, Like, why is my distributed file system so slow? Well, it's because I care about consistency too much, right? I should just write some stuff to some places and then make it the application's fault if things are inconsistent, right? So that's called simplicity. That's a virtue. That's been known since Socratic times. So like, here's another question. So like, how do I get my paper published at SOSP? It's very, very simple. So first of all, there's this relationship between the amount of code that you write and then how clever the reviewer thinks that you are, right? So if you only write a few lines of code, then they think that you graduated from DeVry and concluded that your system's just a toy, right? But then if you write too many lines of code, it's like, well, you don't understand elegance, right? And that's what sort of smart people mean, as you don't think like I think. So really what you want to do is be at that sweet spot right there, because really you only need a few thousand lines of code to implement computational elegance. Similarly, there's this relationship between the amount of math mode you have in your paper and its likelihood of acceptance. So, if you include too much math mode, that's almost just as bad as including too little. If you're too little, you're kind of like a car mechanic. But if you're too much, you're like one of those weird queuing theorists who technically are in the building, but we don't really hang out with them. They submit to those weird European conferences that only weird European people were in. And so, hashtag America equal. Basically, the optimal approach to get an OSCI paper, you want to add multi-core aware I/O priorities to Linux using 3,000 lines of code and then prove that it's fair using induction, not TLA plus, because induction is math for the common person. TLA plus is for things who, robots and things like that. So here's my point. The point is that the universe is not really confusing, right? So it's usually pretty obvious what you need to do to go out there and succeed in life. However, a lot of people, particularly students, don't really understand that. So let me give you an example. So one time I was working with a student, right? I won't name any names, right? And we were trying to design a very simple server for log files. So the system design was very, very simple, right? All the log files that are located on a single server in a single directory of that server. Just single everything, right? The server did have to be able to handle multiple clients at one time, but the thing is that each of these files is treated like a queue, right? And so an important detail here is that this didn't have to scale at all. It was just a little thing you built off to the side. It could be super simple. This was not the point of the project. We needed something to basically take all of our messages from standard error, right? So I go to the intern. I tell the intern, in the first iteration of this thing, let's just have a single lock per file. This is very simple. It's very straightforward. This is what Jesus wants us to do, right? And so basically, the intern came to me and he's like, I got this, old man. I don't need your old man advice telling me what to do. I had a 3.7 GPA in college. I'm amazing, right? And so I was like, okay, well, that's nice and cute that you think that you have independent ideas that will work. Now, I've seen people like you, and in fact, you fail. You see, it's like in both the abstract and the specific, I don't think you have the chance to pull it off. I always didn't say it directly because I'm an educator, so therefore I'm very cuddly, but this is what I was thinking in my head. So I said, listen, just do this simple thing, and then everything's going to work out fine. We can do something more complex later. And so it's funny because any of you who've ever been a teacher, you know that feeling when you look a young person in the eye and you say, do something. They look back at you and they say, yeah, I'll do it. But you can see in their mind, like, I'm totally not going to do it. Totally. It's like as soon as I get out of eyesight, I'm doing one over what you told me to do. Multiply what I did by what you told me to do, it'd be like a unity function. So anyway, I knew this kid was headed for disaster, but sometimes people only can learn through pain. So I let the kid go out there and work, and then he came back, and he said, well, I finished my first pass implementation. And so I said, well, cool, so what architecture did you use? And he said that he designed something that sort of looked like this. It's like there's this complex hierarchy of locks, and there's like reader-writer locks, and spin locks, and kernel mode locks. There was no kernel mode component. Like there were semaphores. He invented like new types of like queuing disciplines. It was just pretty insane. So I said, as far as I can tell, you've made a Merkle tree of blocks. I've blown up my own head. What does that even mean? And once again, he's looking straight down. He's like, don't worry, dude. It's totally gonna work. And I said, it's gonna work. Like, so you haven't tested this thing? What's going on? He's like, no. But it's like 4:45 p.m. So I'll probably test it a couple times before I head out for work at 5:15 or whatever. So I was like, okay, let me know what happens when you go and you test this thing. And it's so funny, it's almost like when you see like a puppy dog, with a stick, just trying to understand the nature of the stick. It's never gonna get there. So anyway, so he kind of runs off and he's like super happy, and he's like just assured that it would work out of the box. And so he comes back in a few hours, and this kid just looks devastated. Like his whole family's been kidnapped by pirates. And so I said, did everything work? he's just silent. He's like a human ellipses, right? He's just nothing there. He's quiet. And then I said, so did anything work? And then he blurts out, no. And so I say, well, what happened when you tried to run the code? And he said, and I quote, what might have could happen. And I said, what verb tense is that? That's like past perfect conditional present condition. That verb tense has never been used in the history of verb tenses. He just kind of looked at me and he just said, well, you know, wah. And he was just so crushed that the obvious thing that was going to happen to him had in fact happened to him. And it was fantastic. I mean, I know it's probably not right of me to sort of laugh at the strugglings of a child, but I laughed a lot. It was a pretty good day for me. So I guess that the moral of this story is that simple designs are often better than the complex ones, right? So just think back to the classics, the lever, the pulley, the inclined plane. These are the things that make humanity great, right? Embrace empiricism, embrace simplicity, right? Don't be like the ancient Greeks. I don't know if you've ever studied like, ancient Greeks' thoughts on like, science stuff, but they basically spent all their time being non-empirical and coming up with these like tortured explanations for how stuff works. So like someone might say like, hey, why are people able to see things? And then someone else might say, well, it's because like light's generated by our eyes, which is why like if you close your eyes, but you're the only person in the room, then like the room becomes dark. But then at nighttime, it's like still dark, even though people with eyes are like looking at the night. So that's just the way that like Zeus wants it. So really? yeah, I'm pretty sure. Cool. Do you want to throw a disc in? You know I don't have any hands! Which was like a key problem, of course, back in old times. Because of the Minotaur, always goes for the hands first. So basically, that's the way things work in ancient Greece. I'm just encouraging all of you youths out there that we can do better than that. Right? So, in conclusion, I think that my take-home point is don't make mistakes. Keep in mind that in life, you probably only have one chance at succeeding. If you blow that chance, you're probably ruined forever. Another thing to keep in mind is that everyone's watching you constantly. So even when you don't think people are watching you, I at least will be watching. I love to judge. It's easy for me to do. I'm doing it right now. So just keep that in mind. And now you might be thinking, but James, well, I think that, I'm my own worst enemy. That's wrong. You do have enemies. You actually have a lot more enemies than you think that you have. And those people are constantly plotting to make you fail. So what I recommend is that being paranoid is actually being realistic. So always sleep with one eye open and always try to subvert and defeat even people you think you're friends because they're not. Hey, go out there, have fun. Okay? You're in college, you're in grad school, you're only going to be young once, and then you're going to die, and that's going to be it. So just take advantage of your youth while you have it. Thank you for your time, and please enjoy the rest of the conference.
Do we have any questions for him?
You got a question? Yeah.
What's the meaning of life?
What's the meaning of life? So people who ask that question typically either go one of two ways. So either you're going to go to Berkeley and become a hippie, or you're going to sell your soul and go to Wall Street, right? So it kind of depends, right? What is the answer of life for me? Mainly to sort of stay out of the disasters that other foolish people create. Right? So, because here's the thing, right? A lot of times you'll have these friends, right? I love a question. This is a very great question. I like this a lot. Because one thing I always try to tell people is that, you have these friends sometimes, they come up to you and they say, listen, man, I'm having this problem, it's really tricky, I can't figure it out. And then they explain that problem to you, and then you hear it, and 10 seconds in, it's like, the problem is you. This isn't a generalizable thing, They're like, hasn't everyone struggled with the issue of like investing all of their money in like alpaca farms, and then the alpaca farm, they all get like, some disease and you lost all your money. And it's like, that literally only happens to me. And you can't say that, obviously, right? Because you have to kind of soft sell it, right? And so my advice to you, what's the meaning of life? Really, it's just not getting dragged down by sort of the series of idiots who will try to drag you down. So I think that's a positive message. So that's maybe like a lower back tattoo, maybe like a, whatever, that's just me. So, please.
I see a wearing facial hair, would you recommend that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So not everyone can pull off the Mickens. This is what I call this look. And there have been many people at MSR, for example, who try to pull this off to varying effect. One thing I would say is if you're a lady, don't try it. You know, it's the 21st century, we can do what we want, but I'm just saying it's probably not going to work out as well. If you're a dude too, this is actually a totally serious point. So a lot of people think that they can, like anyone can shave their head, just like anyone can do it. It's just like a thing. It's like I'm feeling free today. Something changed in my life. A lot of people have messed up, bumpy heads. This is completely the truth. When I was in grad school, we had this tradition that I started, and that mainly only I participated in. When I was pushing for a paper deadline, I would grow a hockey beard, right? So I'd actually sort of like grow like a playoff beard, you know? It's like 3 weeks ahead of time. So by the time you saw me, like, you know, like 1 hour out, you'd be like, I look like Saddam Hussein, right? And so I tried to convince people to do this, nobody wanted to do this. So, but one year, people decided to shave their head, right? Just because they thought it'd make them like sleek and mean or whatever. And man, it was a clown down. That's a technical term. So we all decided to shave our heads sort of in the privacy of our own, you know, vote or whatever. We came in to work the next day, and it was one of those things where it's almost like I remember like back when you were in high school, people go away for the summer, you know, and they come back. It's like, oh, you're taller, like now you have freckles or whatever. And basically, people came back and I'm like, wow, you got a messed up head. that should have been kept close. You know? So, you know, to answer your question more directly, no, not everyone can pull this off. You know, and so what I recommend you do is, you know, and in general, whenever you want to make a life decision, don't just ask you whether it's a good idea, right? Ask other people who are at least as smart or smarter than you if it's a good idea, right? Because you can convince yourself of anything, right? I mean, I remember one time, this is also a true story. I was at Detroit Metro Airport, so I went to grad school at the University of Michigan, right? And then I saw Ted Nugent. I saw the Nuge there because Nuge lives in. I can call him the Nuge. I'm just talking shop right now. So the Nuge was there, and so I'm like, how am I gonna get the Nuge's attention, right? So I play guitar. So I thought I could get his attention by yelling out the chords for the hit song Cat Scratch Fever. So I started yelling out, A, B, B, C, A, B, C, right? And so, but he's just gone. He's like 8 feet taller than the Predator, but he's like amazingly agile, right? And so I'm running through the Detroit Metro County Airport, just yelling out the chords of Cat Scratch Fever. Long story short, this takes place for about 10 minutes. And then I run into the security guard, and I'm like, dude, I'm all sweaty and angry and saying something. He's like, dude, have you seen the Nuge? And I thought that like he would sort of understand like my spiritual quest, and he basically said, well, not basically, he said, and I quote, "You're about to get shot, son. You need to stop running around, stop yelling out guitar chords, get out of my airport." And so then I thought I'd be clever. I'm like, so are you Mr. Detroit Metro County Airport? Is it really your airport? And then like another cop came up, he's like, "We will seriously shoot you." So yeah, once again, I guess that's the question. I wish that I had a mentor there. So fine, that's the pithy stuff.
So can you tell us about your first internship? I was wondering why you lost your hair then.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So my first internship, so I did 2 internships basically. I did one internship at MSR in Cambridge in the UK, and then I did one internship at Redmond actually, so for the group that I work for now. There are 2 very different types of internships because MSR Cambridge is a much smaller lab, it's much more international, and everyone there speaks like a James Bond villain, right? So everyone speaks, but they speak sort of like this really like interesting, charismatic, but idiosyncratic, you know, sort of English, you know? And they speak actually English better than me, right? Which is the other funny thing too, because I came out there and I'm like, yeah, right, so I talk all the time, what's going on? Yeah. They come over there and it's like, yeah, perhaps what maybe your algorithms are a little bit wrong, because of course, you know, if you look to Foucault, Derrida, things like that. That's a good point, I hadn't looked at it. So yeah, basically I spent that internship getting schooled by people, and then I spent my second internship getting schooled by people who were American, basically, because I was the difference there. But over here in Redmond, it was actually, it's a bigger lab, you know, and they have sort of more people from different disciplines. What I will say was great about that internship is that, this is back when we were in 112, so you've been over the campus, right? So 112 is a totally different building than 99, which is where we are right now. 99 is like one of these big, like open, airy atriums, just designed to make you think about like, you know, India or like Galadriel or things like that. 112 was like this sort of like Stalinist, like, you know, industrial military, like just like everywhere you turn is like an office made of other offices. It's like a crappy Inception. It's like a good way to say it. And so back then, they actually would put us in these conference rooms. Like now the interns are weak, right? Because they put the interns like 4 to an office. So back when I was there in 112, they would put us like 10 or 12 to an office. So it was like Oregon Trail in there. I mean, it was just like, just total, just like festering humanity, you know? And you know what it's like? Here's the best way to describe it. So you know, like around the end of, like about this time, I guess, like finals time, like you go to the undergraduate library, and like you come in there, and you just smell it. It doesn't smell bad, but it doesn't smell neutral. You know, like something has happened. It's not clear what. It's like stress, sweat, like who knows, right? Like that was basically our intern pod from like week 2. So it was a very character building experience. So I think I learned a lot about life there. I somehow managed to get a paper out of it, but it was very funny. So our intern pod was actually known as the no-go pod for all the mentors because it was just so loud. And like people, I remember I would come in sometimes late, and you could just hear like this rumbling in the distance. It was just all the interns in my pod just yelling and being ridiculous. So what happened is that all the intern mentors, when they wanted their interns' attention, they wouldn't dare cross the threshold. So they would just stay there. There's this one guy, Fang, you may know Fang. Fang is super polite. I love him so much. But he's so polite, like we were just rude Yankee Americans, right? And so Fang would try to get his intern, he'd come up to the edge and he'd say, Jeffrey. And like, no, he couldn't hear him because we were just yelling our heads off. And so Fang would get stuck in this timeout loop. Jeffrey, I'm going to lunch by myself. I can't resolve this anymore. So once again, the pithy summary, I had a great time. You have a question, Tim?
Do you have any recommendations for the grad students on how to manage their advisors?
How to manage their advisor. I do actually have a lot of advice about that. Some of this, just for time restrictions, I'll take some of it offline, but the number one thing you gotta understand is that, particularly when it comes to your advisor, and also your committee too, it's all about those Jedi mind tricks, okay? I'm gonna share some secrets with you. Do not tell my advisor about this. Do not tell my committee about this. But there's a couple different ways that you can pick your committee, you can pick your advisor, right? Your advisor, you want someone who's sort of like, a strong mentor, understands you, if like you're a night person, maybe they're a night person, blah, blah. You pick your committee. This is just me speaking. It's not Microsoft, not anyone, but this is 100% true. You pick your committee, psychological weakness. That's the number one thing. Listen, quote me on that, okay? Well, actually, don't quote me. But like it's just true. It's like a saying. So, because the thing is, it's like when you get your committee. I don't know. Some of you probably started writing your dissertation or things like this. Here's the thing. I knew when I was a grad student, like the first 2 years, I was like, man, grad school's amazing. I could be a student forever. I just love learning. It's fantastic. Then like year 3, I'm kind of like, it would be nice to not be poor all the time. Maybe I want a TV that like doesn't have depth. Just kind of flat, you know? And then about year 4, I was just kind of like, I need to get out of here, I need to shank somebody, it's just not sustainable. And so, at University of Michigan, they have this tradition where it's like, your dissertation should be like this soaring, like Maya Angelou style document that's like written from scratch and sort of, and I was like, nope, not mine. So my advisor didn't want to hear that though. Right? And so I started playing this long troll, basically. So I just sort of walked by his office, like, how's the paper come along? I'm like, oh, you mean chapter 3 of my staple job? Pretty good. And he's like, no, you're totally not going to do that. I'm like, I totally. And so then I had to form my committee, right? And so people didn't know this, but I actually had interviews for people to be on my committee. Because I can't just have somebody who's dropping hammers all the time, because I got stuff to do with my life. So I picked one person who was hustling for tenure. This person was maybe like 2 or 3 years